Merry Christmas Eve morning to all who observe the holiday, including myself. Even though I am Jewish, I love Christmas Eve. I love the Christmas holiday. And please, I hope that you are finding a way to enjoy this. It can be a hard time of year. However, it can be an amazing day because today or yesterday, Christmas came early. Donald Trump is totally hosed when it comes to his giant agenda to try to overtake Democratic cities and leave National Guard troops there in order to, as we have worried, try to intimidate and even interfere in future elections. And the Supreme Court put an end to that yesterday. Now, I do need to break this down because, in fact, even when I say the Supreme Court put an end to that, I need to provide a caveat. This is a preliminary ruling. There is an actual legal case that is still underway. And so, technically speaking, my friends, in this Supreme Court case, which was Illinois versus Donald Trump when it began, in this case, it was Donald Trump who was bringing this up to the United States Supreme Court because he was wanting to stop the courts below from putting a halt on his agenda. Let me translate that into human language. Illinois, namely Governor Pritzker, was pissed off that Donald Trump had federalized the Illinois National Guard and sent them into Chicago. And the pretense under which Donald Trump had Hegseth do this, the Secretary of Defense, federalize the Illinois National Guard and say, stand around, watch everything, intimidate people and such. The pretense under which they did that was to say Chicago is a dangerous city and these Democrats don't know how to run their cities and we are going to put them everywhere in Democrat cities. And that ain't going to fly. And the court below put a stay. The court below had put a stay on this, agreed with Illinois, with Governor Pritzker, that this didn't fly under law. And we'll talk about those laws in a minute, but I'm giving you the big picture. The courts below said, no effing way, Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth. We are thinking you're going to lose this case. So we're putting a timeout on this until the case progresses. And Donald Trump didn't want a timeout. He wanted to have his federalized National Guard troops in Chicago, right? He didn't like that. And you've seen he's done this in Portland and Los Angeles and DC. We'll get to that in a moment about the scope of this ruling. But Donald Trump wanted them to stay in. So he went up to the United States Supreme Court and said, justices, while this case is pending, that I think I'm going to win, and therefore you should let me have these federalized troops, these National Guard troops. You should let me have them while the case stretches out. And cases, as you know, stretch out for flippin' ever, practically. So he said, please, 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 9 justices, overrule the court below and let me, while this case is pending, leave the National Guard there under Pete Hegseth's command. And yesterday, the Supreme Court, this is the early Christmas present, the late Hanukkah present, the actually Festivus present. Yesterday was Festivus. Okay, I'm getting to it. So the US Supreme Court, in a 6-3 order, I mean, it wasn't, let me just be clear, it wasn't like a signed kind of deal, but there were dissents. So 6 of the justices, and that's all we needed, said, yeah, you know what? You haven't convinced us with your arguments, Donald Trump, that you have a legitimate reason to have this federalized National Guard in Chicago. The statutes that you cite don't work. So we think essentially we're going to leave the stay in place. We're not letting you do this. Let's see how the case progresses. Huge loss for Donald Trump. I'm going to dive in a little more to the details. And I promise you we'll get to the new Epstein file releases, but there is nothing more important than this right now, guys. Really. I could not, if I jumped up and down and rang bells and shouted from the rooftops, if I could climb up onto a roof, it wouldn't be enough to express the joy and the importance of this decision from yesterday. And if you're not aware of what I mean by Festivus, if you're a Seinfeld aficionado, there's that holiday where George's father says, Festivus for the rest of us. It is a day about airing our grievances. But guess what? No grievance, we flippin' won. Okay, so let me back up and talk about what will this affect? Likely, this could affect almost any city other than DC, where Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth have federalized the state's National Guard and over the will of the governor and put them in the city. And I say it wouldn't apply to DC because the president is in charge of that. So that's a more complicated story. Okay. So in sum, because we're going to do the deep dive because I want you to be smart about this, why this is so cool. And it will be a deep dive you can understand because this is Christmas Eve and I can make anything Santa simple, right? This is a gift to you. Donald Trump wanted to be the Grinch and take the Constitution away from us, but we still have it, and we still have the acts of Congress. This is, let me just express again, to be an authoritarian dictator requires military force in our cities. He doesn't have that ability. Caveat, we'll get to that because let me just be clear. The statutes that he leaned on cannot be used in the way he wanted, but there are ways that they can be used. Let's just get into the nitty gritty here. It is just a 3-page decision. And so I am going to right now, as I like to do, guys, I want to grab the link. And this is from the US Supreme Court's own website, and I am dropping it in the chat. So there's the opinion, right? And it's right there as a link, okay? And now I'm going to pull it up for a moment so you can see what I'm looking at, and then I'm going to take it down, okay? So let me add it to the stage so you can see. Here we go. And let me blow it up. This is the link. Blow it up as much as I can. Fit to one page. Blow up. Okay. Well, hell, maybe you can actually see this. Let me see how you're doing. Okay. You can see it. Let me make it a little bigger. I know people on phones, maybe not. Oops, that's a bit too, well, no. There we go, guys. What do you think? Oh, I love it. Folks in the chat, do you think this is visible-ish? I think so. Okay, welcome. Let me pop in for a second. Welcome to law school. Welcome to law school. This is what we're looking at. If you want to pull it up later on your own, great. Yes, very visible. Is it okay? I think it's more visible when I back out of the screen. So I'm going to back out of the screen. There's me, but I'm going to go on the side so you can actually read the text. As you can see, early Christmas present dated December 23rd, 2025. What you see here was, as I mentioned, well, let me start at the top. You want a real law school lesson? See the very top where it says cite as 607 US blank 2025? What the hell is that? Okay, let me tell you. If this were our law school class, I would say, I would call on one of you. Oh, what hell? I'm calling on you. Anyone in the class want to tell me what 607 represents? Anyone? Okay. I'll be asking other questions. Okay, 607 represents, let me say that, well, the US, you might think that's the United States, but that represents a court reporting type book, volumes. And it's the US reporter for Supreme Court decisions. There's another official, this is the official one, US. There's another reporting book that says S.CT, Supreme Court. I like to cite the US one. Okay, so 607, my friends, represents the 607th volume of these. Every year, there is a different number, I believe. So this is 607 years when they've had these reports. Now, the other thing, and anyone can correct me if they're wrong, but that's if you go to a bookshelf in a law library, or you try to find this on a law database, you would say 607 US, and you would say the next thing. What is the next thing that's a blank right now? That is the page number this will be on. They have not paginated the books yet because they're going to put them in a certain order. And so you don't have a number and it won't be bound for a few years. And so until that happens, you will cite it as a blank. That last thing is the year. Okay, great. So what else do we have here? This is a case of the United States Supreme Court. And as you can see, even though I told you it started out as Illinois versus Donald Trump, it is now, because he's bringing it up to the Supreme Court, it flips. And Donald Trump, President of the United States, and others, that's what et al. Means, brought this against Illinois and others. Why? He brought this up to the Supreme Court, asking them, like I said, to let him go ahead and keep the troops in Illinois. But it's an application for a stay, because remember how I told you the courts below stopped him from moving forward while with these federalized troops there pending the lawsuit. So the lawsuit began with Illinois suing Donald Trump and others and the administration, saying you don't have the legal right to do this. That case is ongoing, but there are these orders. People like to be able to have action before the case ends, because cases can drag out, right? And this would be very critical to get the flippin' federalized National Guard out of Chicago before the case ends, because this case could go on for years and years. So Donald Trump was pissed off because he was on the losing side of the status quo. Essentially, the status quo that he was fighting against was that he wouldn't be allowed to keep his troops in Chicago, his federalized National Guard. So that is why he was bringing this case up. Now let's go more. So this is and I now have to back out of here so you can see what I am reading with you. Okay. So this is literally how it begins. You don't see normally you would see with the opinion a justice's name, who would be the person writing it on behalf of either the whole court or certain justices. This is very short, and it's so important that I want to read some of it to you and then walk you through the legal explanation. The reason why I want to read some of this to you is to show you that you have the capacity with your own eyes and processing apparatus known as the brain to read things like this and not necessarily need to just trust people like me or talking heads or reports. It's helpful to hear someone's summary, but to become a um, more highly functioning human being, you should trust yourself too. You can do this. So let's take a look at this. These are the words of the 6 justices. Federal immigration enforcement efforts have encountered significant resistance as well as some violence in Chicago. According to the government, guys, that means Trump, federal officers have been obstructed, threatened, and assaulted as they attempt to perform their duties. Okay, so there's 2 things. They say Chicago is a terribly dangerous place, but they're also noting here that people are resisting ICE. Yay, people. Okay, I'll continue. The government also alleges that an immigration and customs enforcement processing facility in Broadview, Illinois, has been the site of frequent and sometimes violent protests, damaging federal property and threatening the safety of federal officers. These attacks, the government says, have greatly impeded its efforts to enforce the immigration laws. Okay, I want to stop there. We're going to get back into the decision, but we need to talk about that. I think you have seen the activity in the Broadview facility, Illinois. There have been major protests there. And one of the most amazing things that the American people have been doing is, oh, and let me say this. Part of Christmas is giving. Please, it's totally free. Hit like and subscribe. It's free to subscribe. It makes all the difference in the world. Thank you. And thank you, Deb. Okay. So you have seen that the American people, we've seen clergy, we've seen young people, we've seen older people, we have seen so many stand outside of these facilities and resist what we know is going on. And it's not just the facilities, as you know, it's across the country where we're seeing our neighbors. We are seeing people who are US citizens and others who are not being violently treated, having their civil rights and human rights and bodily autonomy violated, right? So this is happening in our cities. So the case begins here. The decision begins here with what the government is complaining about. This is kind of brilliant because it's saying, here, this is what you're saying is happening. But it's also giving us an historical window in to America in 2025. This is one of, like I said, the most important Supreme Court decisions in our lifetime at this particular moment. This has if it had gone a different way, I don't know what I would be saying to you this morning. Okay, let's go back to this and talk. So, right. So again, the government says that these protests have greatly impeded its efforts to enforce the immigration laws. Then we get to, on October 4th, 2025, the president, guys, that's Donald Trump, called 300 members of the Illinois National Guard into active federal service to protect federal personnel and property in Illinois, particularly in and around Chicago. The following day, members of the Texas National Guard were also federalized and sent to Chicago. Guys, right? And so, what is the statute? It's right here. I think I've highlighted it for you. Do you see that? In calling forth the Guard, the president relied on 10 USC 12406 subsection 3. Now, guys, we have done this before. We have looked at this statute, and I promise you, we're going to do that again. but not now. We've got to do the key thing. We've got to look at this decision so you know what's going on. Okay. So the court says, so Donald Trump, just to summarize what we just said, on October 4th, called in 300 members of the Illinois National Guard, federalized them. He also called in members of the Texas National Guard and federalized them in Chicago this October. And the president relied on this statute, 10 USC 12406. This statute is known as National Guard and Federal Service. And he, again, subsection 3. Now, I actually want to do this for a moment. Let's talk about, let's take this and let's share this. The heart of this case is going to be this statute. So the Supreme Court is pointing at it. Let's take a moment and look at it ourselves so you're not wondering. Now, I know we talked about this before, but, we talk about a lot of laws. So it's okay if you don't remember this one. Let's pull it up right here. Okay. So this is, again, I love this website. It's a Legal Information Institute, and it's operated by Cornell Law School. Huge public service. It means, let me just take this out. It means you don't have to go down to a law library or know what to maybe Google or have a friend who's a lawyer. This makes you an equipped citizen to look up any statute. And I have my students use this because it's easy in class to do this. Okay, so let's add this to the stage. What is the law that Donald Trump was relying on, that the Supreme Court is setting us up in yesterday's decision to say won't fly? Okay, he's using this National Guard and Federal Service, and they said it was subsection 3. So that would be whenever the president is unable with regular forces to execute the laws of the United States, he would be permitted to call into federal service the National Guard. Now, he used subsection 3. This decision by the Supreme Court is going to say that doesn't work. And I'm going to tell you why. I'm giving you a spoiler alert right now. If you want to find out on your own, plug your ears. But it helps for me to tell you this so you know where we're headed. The Supreme Court said, and let me add this to the stage, and let me just go right to this part, and I'm going to blow up this page as big as I can. Okay. The Supreme Court said this. Donald Trump is looking at this language and saying, I'm unable with my regular forces, which with the quote, the regular forces to execute the laws of the United States. By that, he meant federal law. Okay. And he means just any federal laws, right? The key thing is this is the language that this case looks at. What do the words with the regular forces mean? Which empowers him to federalize. The government asked this court to stay the district court's order. So so this is key. Let me just say what the key part is. They denied this motion. They let the guard to stay, but maintaining the bar. They couldn't be deployed. So they were waiting the outcome of this Supreme Court. Okay. The government asked this court to stay the district court's order. So Donald Trump goes in and says, I want to be able to have troops deployed, National Guard troops deployed. The government asked this court to stay the trial court's order. After the response and reply were filed, Justice Barrett referred the application to the court. Why Justice Barrett? Because the different justices on the Supreme Court get cases brought up to them, and then they go forward. Okay. We directed the parties to file supplemental letter briefs on an issue that the district court had addressed, but the parties' initial briefs had not. The meaning of the term regular forces in 12406(3. That's what we had just looked at. In its supplemental brief, the government, that's Trump, argues that the term refers to civilian law enforcement officers, such as those employed by ICE or the Federal Protective Service. So earlier I said, the ordinary police, what they're saying actually is, I want to clarify what I said. What they're talking about is the ordinary people employed by ICE, right? Or customs and enforcement. So echoing the district court, and so they agreed that this means the regular forces of the United States military. That's what the government said. I'm sorry. Yeah, okay. We conclude, this is the important part, we conclude that the term regular forces in 124063 likely refers to the regular forces of the U.S. military, not to the civilian, not to the civilian law enforcement officers, whether that be local law enforcement, like I said, or these employed by ICE. And the court says, no, we believe it most likely means the military. This interpretation means that to call the National Guard into active federal service under 124063, the president must be unable with the regular military to execute the laws of the United States. Holy shit. Okay, let's go on. Because the statute requires an assessment of the military's ability to execute the laws, it likely applies, this is important, only when the military could legally execute the laws. Holy shit. So let me just back up. This is his dead end. The court is saying, dude, if you're trying to rely on this passage because there's no invasion of the United States and there's no rebellion, you're going to have to rely on subsection 3 saying, you know what, the regular forces could not execute the law. We're talking military forces, but guess what? Here's the kicker. You can't send the military in like you wanna, because here we go. It likely only applies where the military could legally execute the laws. Such circumstances are exceptional. Under the Posse Comitatus Act, the military is prohibited from, quote, executing the laws, and quote, except in cases and under circumstances expressly authorized by the Constitution or Act of Congress. So, and they're citing a different statute. So before the president, Donald Trump, can federalize the National Guard under that subsection 3, he likely must have statutory or constitutional authority to execute the laws with the regular military. And that regular military must be unable to perform that function. Holy shit. At this preliminary stage, the government has failed to identify a source or authority that would allow the military to execute the laws in Illinois. The president has not invoked a statute that provides an exception to the Posse Comitatus Act. Now, I know you see this. It says Kavanaugh concurring in judgment. That happens below, so don't worry about that. Instead, Donald Trump relies on inherent constitutional authority, and I put that in quotes, inherent, that according to the government allows him to use the military to protect federal personnel and property. But the government also claims, consistent with the longstanding view of the executive branch, that performing such protective functions does not constitute executing the laws within the meaning of the statute. So, if this is correct, it's hard to see how performing those functions would be executing the laws under the statute he's relying on. Now, thus, at least in this posture, the government, Donald Trump, has not carried its burden to show that 124063 permits the president to federalize the Guard in the exercise of inherent authority to protect federal personnel and property in Illinois, right? Federal personnel like ICE or the buildings. That's what they were trying to say. We need not and do not address the reviewability of findings made by the president under 124063 or any other statute. The application is denied. Okay, that's what I was reading. Now, guys, this is huge. And again, I want to be really clear. When I was saying ordinary police and I said cops or state authority, I mean actually ordinary forces. What Donald Trump was arguing wasn't that. They were saying Chicago is lawless. There are all these protests, and poor ICE and Customs, they can't protect the buildings. They need the National Guard to help them do that. And the Supreme Court said, nope, that's not gonna fly, we believe. So again, I think this is huge. I think even as I'm trying to understand the case, because I was reading it with you, I'd only seen summaries before. As I'm trying to parse through it, I'm understanding it better. Now, the one thing I want to pull up here, though, I want to pull this up, sorry, is remember how they said, this is not a reason to overcome this posse comitatus act and let the military, the actual, the first step is Army, Navy, Air Force, or Marines. And if they can't do the job, then you can bring in the National Guard. Okay, remember that? Well, what were the examples? And the court, let me just go back to here. There was this citation to 18 USC. Do you see that? 1385. So 18 USC 1385 is the citation that is the citation of the Posse Comitatus Act, right? So this is what they were saying. Now, where it's good is Donald Trump loses in the short term, and that's great. Where it's bad is I know how Donald Trump thinks. It's so obvious. And here is how he thinks. Let's go back to the statute. He, I'm sure, has already said, I see. There are 3 ways that I can federalize the National Guard. Let's just use one of the other ways. So let's try the first one. This is what he's going to try. Aren't we being invaded by a foreign nation? Well, he is going to try to argue that. But we are not being invaded by a foreign nation. I know that he's trying to argue that these people on boats in the Caribbean, destined for Suriname to send cocaine to Europe, I know he's claiming that they're part of a narco-terrorist group at war with the United States. But that has not been tested in court. And I don't see that as any kind of invasion by a foreign nation. So that ain't going to work. Next, he'll say, and I know he won't listen to his lawyers, but it won't work if he tries it in court. What is the other thing he could invoke? Rebellion or danger of rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States. Can't see how he's going to win this, especially the guy who pardoned all the January 6th people who literally were, even those who were accused of violating the Insurrection Act, or I'm sorry, sedition. I shouldn't say that. Even those who were, I said it wrong, who were involved in seditious conspiracy, and those who were violated other federal laws when they broke into and trespassed in the Capitol and broke windows and violently assaulted and threatened Capitol Police and so on. The fact that he is pardoning them seems crazy. So I don't see this. I don't see Donald Trump being able to do this, but I think he will want to. But that ain't going to happen. So this is hugely great news. Now, there's another bit of good news. Remember yesterday when I showed you a clip from someone he actually goes by the name someone pointed out, CoffeeZilla, and he does a lot of deep dives. I think the link I gave you to his site, I think it's called Voidzilla, but he goes by CoffeeZilla. He was the guy who said, hey, we noticed that the DOJ had released a little early or for a couple hours the eighth tranche of documents. And remember how I pointed out to you what I thought was the most important part of it? Well, guess what? A few hours later, the DOJ officially made public those documents. And as I said to you, the most important piece in here, the most important piece is the revelation that there are Epstein lists. There were lists created in 2019 of co-conspirators to charge. This was after Epstein was found dead in his cell of apparent suicide or apparent murder. And remember that I talked to you about the document I'm about to share with you that said there are also lists, there are also memoranda explaining who they might charge. And what we found out yesterday, and just to confirm, is that the only names that were not redacted, were Les Wexner, the businessman from Ohio, and Ghislaine Maxwell. Now, Wexner has never been charged, and there are other names. Right now, Wexner is still alive. He is 88 years old. These memos, this document refers to these people, but we have not seen that. And it is being withheld. And that is possibly the most important thing in all of the Epstein files. And I'm glad that we were on that yesterday. Now, I would like to share with you so you can see it. And this is in the files. It's so critical. So I want to share this with you. It's right from the government's website, and we will. I think I got this. I'm here, and okay, I'm going to pull this up for you, and we can stare at it. This is, oh boy. Let me get this as big as I can. Okay, and let me get out of the shot. Oh, I am out of the shot. Okay, here we go. This is, by the way, these from and to lines absolutely should not be blacked out. These are probably internal emails well, this is obviously from an assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York, sent to somebody else, probably at DOJ also, right? And the problem here let me just back out of this for a second. There's no permission in the statute to black out these names. It's critical to see these names because the press could ask people about it, and these folks might leak when they are asked and give more information here. These should not be redacted. Okay, so let's look at this. This is, I believe, the most important thing that we should see. So here's what it says. I think I'm going to make it a little smaller. Okay. This is May 6th, 2020. This is after the death of Jeffrey Epstein. And it is while Donald Trump is still president of the United States with his own Department of Justice in place. Now, also, Ghislaine Maxwell, I want to tell you when she was charged. I know she was sentenced in 2022, but I'm wondering when she was charged by the DOJ. I think I have this. Let me just see. Ghislaine Maxwell, I know that she was sentenced again in June of 2022. She was found guilty in December of 2021, but I don't recall exactly when she was charged. And I think that, yeah, I don't know exactly when she was charged. I do know that it was clearly after Epstein died. Okay. So this is May of 2020. And this is an email, again, from an assistant U.S. attorney at the Southern District of New York, identifying memos that have been written. The first is a memo on co conspirators we could potentially charge. The Monday after Epstein's death, delivered that Wednesday. It's 7 pages. So clearly, when this memo was 7-page memo was created, Ghislaine was obviously on that, because this is just the Monday after his death that it was written. The second memo, co-conspirator update memo, and that was written in December of 2019, and it's 86 pages. The third document is a corporate prosecution memo from that December of 2019. And it was 13 pages. And this person says it was never discussed. So they're probably saying we haven't talked about that yet. Corporate prosecution memo. What businesses? Then blacked out a something prosecution memo. I don't know who it's against or what it's about. And that was from April. Now we're into 2020. 26 pages, hasn't been discussed in the 3 weeks since we sent it. I'm not sure where these were sent. Maybe to headquarters. And then last one, perjury/NM memo will be another 30 pages. This is, I believe, one of the most important documents, because it gives us a blueprint. It gives us a list. We need to see all of those memos. We absolutely do. Oh, thank you, Michael McAndrews. Exactly. This is what we're talking about. Now, what was released yesterday is really bad for Donald Trump. Beyond, I mean, this is just really important here, right? But it's really bad for Donald Trump himself, because there are several things in the files that point to two things. First, allegations that he raped girls are in there. Absolutely in there. Now, have they been substantiated? That's up to journalists to try. But these are very serious allegations that include one from a limo driver talking about an experience with a passenger in his car that he claims reported he encouraged to report Donald Trump, and I think it was in 2020. And he said that he hadn't heard from her, and then later found out that she had died in Oklahoma, I think was the state. And I want to say to you, this is going to be violent, so you might want to, that the way the limo driver described it is her head had been blown off. He's claiming there was an obituary that he saw, and it's hard to track this down. There are people claiming the name of the person. It seems like investigative journalists could look into this at all to see whether any of this adds up. Now, of course, this is speculation, but this is the kind of stuff in this about him. There are other things about Donald Trump in there. The most significant one that I think the Justice Department is trying to claim isn't true is as follows. In the files, there was a postcard, an image of a postcard that Jeffrey Epstein supposedly wrote out in prison and sent it to Larry Nassar. And you may remember that Larry Nassar was a coach, or he's still alive. He's in prison. I'm sorry. He wasn't. I'm saying he was a coach. What am I saying? He was a convicted. Yes, he was. He was convicted of sexual offenses, and he was part of the U.S. Women's National Gymnastics team. And he was also a team physician at Michigan State. And in 2016, he was investigated, he was arrested, and he was ultimately found guilty and sentenced to I'm sorry. He was arrested and charged. He ultimately pleads guilty to possession of child pornography and tampering with evidence. And he also was sentenced. Anyway, it goes on and on and on. Huge sentences for various of his practices. And he is now de facto a life sentence without parole. Okay. So let's just be clear who he is. There is a postcard, which I will show you, allegedly handwritten by Jeffrey Epstein and sent to Larry Nassar. And it was, here's the tricky thing. The postmark for this is postmarked not from where Jeffrey Epstein was in prison, but postmarked in Virginia 2 days after Epstein died. The reason why, a couple things to back up. The reason why it's even in the government files is because when it got to Nassar, it was returned to sender. It ended up back at the Epstein prison and in the files. The government is claiming, we looked into this a long time ago, and this isn't real. However, CNN has doubled down and said the reason why the postmark is Virginia is because it's got screened by the FBI before it was sent on. And I really do want to share with you where CNN is on this. So give me 1 second to pull this up. I think this is important. Okay, Larry Nassar letter. Here we go. I'm going to pull this up for you. Here we go. And let's share this tab. Give me a sec. Give me 1 second here. Here we go. Let me blow this up for you. Here we go.
Released a new batch of documents in the Jeffrey Epstein investigation, including chilling new evidence that some viewers may find disturbing. This is a jailhouse letter, apparently written by a Jeffrey Epstein. It says J. Epstein, and it was sent to another infamous sex offender. That would be Larry Nassar. The letter appears to include a reference to President Trump. We should note President Trump is not accused of any criminal wrongdoing. And I just spoke to a survivor of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse, Haley Robeson, a short time ago. Here's what she said. And DOJ says some of these things are salacious and there's no truth behind it. That's the statement it just released. But what do you think about the mention of Trump in that letter and what it said?
I think it's very apparent in that specific letter that was just publicized from the Epstein files. I think it's very apparent that there are a group of men that enjoy the company of young women and children. And I think that letter emphasizes that he knew what was going on. And that complicity is enough for me to know you have no business being in the position of power.
Okay. I've got more for you. I want to share the deep dive into that letter. Give me 1 second. I know we're running over a little bit, but I think this is super important, and I'm about to wrap things up. Okay. Here we go.
These 30,000 pages of documents from the Epstein files released overnight, including one which was a letter sent by Jeffrey Epstein, apparently in the days before he took his own life, to convicted sex abuser Larry Nassar, who, again, convicted of abusing so many U.S. gymnasts over the years. In that letter, Epstein wrote to Nassar, our president, and he was referring, it seems, to President Donald Trump at the time, our president also shares our love of young, nubile girls. These 30,000 pages of documents from the Epstein files released overnight, including one which
let me show you the
also shares our love of young, nubile girls.
Okay. So let me read you this letter. Dear LN, as you know by now, I have taken the short route home. Good luck. We shared one thing, our love and caring for young ladies and the hope they'd reach their full potential. Our president also shares our love of young, nubile girls. When a young beauty walked by, he loved to grab, quote unquote, grab, snatch, end quote. Wherever we ended up, something grabbed in the mess halls of something in the mess halls of the system. Life is unfair. Yours, J. Epstein. Now, let me just, sorry, I should blow this up so you can see it better. Now, do I know this is true? This is real? This wasn't some kind of hoax? Who knows? But I got to tell you, I can't imagine someone randomly writing in that fashion. It could be something to get us to believe something and then claim all the files are bullshit. I don't know. But what I will say is the timing is really interesting because we don't know when he wrote this. But if this did, in fact, go to the FBI, which is the reporting, and got looked at, the FBI reports up to the Department of Justice. At the time, it was Bill Barr. Bill Barr, whose father, quite coincidentally, was the guy who hired Epstein back at the Dalton School. Bill Barr, who is really good at covering shit up for Donald. It's quite possible that the timing of Jeff Epstein's death might have corresponded with this idea that he was trying to get out into the world information about Trump and other co-conspirators. Now, I'm not wearing a tinfoil hat, guys. There's every reason to believe the guy who creeped out beauty contestants and said, his daughter made him promise he would not date anyone younger than 17. The guy whose limit, when he said to Howard Stern, and going after girls and young women was age 14. The guy who essentially was found liable for raping my friend E. Jean Carroll. Judge Kaplan, Lewis Kaplan, said it was equivalent of rape. It was sexual abuse because the penetration did not involve Donald Trump's member, but his fingers. Okay, it's disgusting. It's violent sexual assault. This guy who's been credibly accused by more than a dozen other women. Why in the world would we think that he is not, and who was best friends with this guy for years, why would it be a surprise to know that he is implicated? Now, there is more before we go. I think the top takeaways, and this is a great article that I want to share with you from NBC News. They've got top takeaways from this third release, this last tranche. They say it's a third file release, but you could also say it's the eighth. I'm not exactly sure how this numbering works, but this was the third batch since Friday. However, it was numbered and they figured out it was there. And I want to share with you this.
Liberty Mutual customizes.
Wait, this ad will end in 27
Liberty
seconds.
Mutual commercials where they stand in front of the Statue of Liberty and talk about how Liberty Mutual customizes your car insurance so you only pay for what you need?
Here we go.
Yes.
Huh. What happens in this one?
Seagulls.
Okay. They have good ads, I'll admit that.
I
I don't have this insurance.
How are you doing?
Okay. Funny.
Only pay for what you need.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
Tonight, the Justice Department releasing its biggest batch yet of documents related to the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, including this fake Austrian passport with Epstein's photo and a false name. The new release also includes documents that mention President Trump. In one email, a federal prosecutor, citing flight logs, says Trump was a passenger on at least 8 flights between 1993 and 1996, between New York and Florida on Epstein's jet. That he traveled with his then-wife Marla Maples, daughter Tiffany, and son Eric, and saying on another flight, the only 3 passengers are Epstein, Trump, and a 20-year-old whose name is redacted. The files also include this handwritten note, purportedly written by Epstein and sent to Dr. Larry Nassar, another notorious sex offender, including the quote, "Our president also shares our love of young nubile girls." But tonight, the Justice Department says the FBI concluded the letter is fake, saying the FBI determined the writing does not appear to match Jeffrey Epstein's. The letter was postmarked 3 days after Epstein's death and was sent from Northern Virginia when Epstein was jailed in New York, and that it did not include his inmate number, which is required for outgoing mail, calling it a reminder. Just because a document is released by the Department of Justice does not make the allegations or claims within the document factual. The president has said he broke off his relationship with Epstein decades ago, and President Trump has never been accused of any wrongdoing related to Epstein. Also revealed in the documents, in 2019, the FBI discussed interviewing 10 potential co-conspirators. Tonight, the top Senate Democrat wants more information on who they are and why they chose not to prosecute.
Okay. My last thing here, of course, about these takeaways is that we have Jeffrey Epstein's brother repeatedly saying that he believes Donald Trump had his brother killed in prison because he was about to speak out. Okay. The other thing in here that was not mentioned on that short NBC clip is that there were several unverified anonymous tips to the FBI in 2020 with this driver who claimed that a woman told her she wasn't going to the police because she was scared for her life, and then she did. And you know, who knows? The fact that, I mean, I'm not convinced that postcard wasn't real. I'm just not. And the fact that they said it doesn't look like his handwriting, you know, I don't know what his handwriting looks like. I would like to, my real issue here is that list of co-conspirators that was drafted in 2019. Of course, while Donald Trump is president, they are going to cover up and lie, and we will not get to the bottom of any involvement that he had. But in the meantime, while he is president, we can demand the memos that we talked about the co-conspirators. We talked about it yesterday and we talked about it today. But in summation, let me say, Merry Christmas, Happy Early New Year. We will not have a show tomorrow, Christmas Day, or even the 26th, which is known as Boxing Day. I think all of us, especially a long weekend off, but I will be right back here with you on Monday, the 29th, so we can finish out the year together. Thank you, prison mates. We don't need any crazy town because yesterday was amazing. See you on Monday and have a beautiful, beautiful long holiday weekend.
Hello, prison mates. It's the Gen Taub Show. Well, welcome everyone. Let's learn about what is happening in politics yesterday and today. There was hope, and we are together in this democracy we work for. And again, welcome to the Gen Taub Show. day. There is hope, and we are together.